Andrew Baer, and I'm here to introduce a new way to define Jenkins pipelines. Very little about myself. Hi, I'm Andrew Baer. I know I just said that, but longtime Jenkins distributor. I'm now a software engineer at CloudBees, working on Jenkins with a particular focus on pipeline. So a little job history for Jenkins. Originally, there was freestyle. I mean, who here's used freestyle jobs? Who here was lying and has used freestyle jobs but claimed they didn't? Yeah. Or matrix, or what has been known as the evil job type, the native job type. It's configured through the web UI. You choose your SCM in the form. You choose your build steps in the form. You choose your post-build actions. It runs on one node. It checks out one SCM unless you jump through some kind of silly hoops. Does the job, but it's kind of limited. And then there was pipeline. Who here has used pipeline? Who here has used pipeline in production? It's actually more than I expected, so good for you. It's DSL scripting. You can actually have that full level of control over your build. You can check your code, your definition of your build into your SCM. You can have it versioned alongside, branched alongside the rest of your source control. You've got that full control over your SCM checkout, so what node you're running on, what node, using multiple nodes throughout the build, using multiple checkouts. You can do conditionals, you can do all kinds of nifty behavior. And one of my favorite features is that it's durable, with running jobs surviving master restarts, which is great when you have, 9-hour perf test runs that you end up having to kill after 8 hours due to an issue with something else hanging on the master, and then the perf team hates you forever. So, yeah. So while pipeline's great, it's not perfect. Well, yeah, it's probably not fair, but it's never going to be perfect, but it's got some real accessibility and usability issues. When you're coming from freestyle or another CI tool like Travis, pipeline scripts can be really unfamiliar. You see this big block of code, and you're like, wait, what do I have to learn a new language? I won't have to learn a new language. And while you don't really need to know Groovy to write great pipeline scripts, it can feel that way. And a lot of behavior that we've come to expect from freestyle isn't there automatically in pipeline, because you've got that significantly greater control. It means that there's a lot less opinionated behavior, a lot less default behavior. The most obvious of those is that you're not going to get build emails when your build fails unless you wrap your build in a try-catch or a catch error and send your email after that. Because when your build fails, it stops. And pipeline scripting without any additional structure is really hard to represent in a visual editor. I mean, Visual Basic is a thing, but we don't want to have to replicate that. Writing an IDE to do visual editing of a Turing-complete, fairly powerful scripting language is hard. And while it's great to be able to check your build into source control and have it version, etc., sometimes you really just want to go click a few buttons, bam, you're done. So, yeah. So, here's what I'm doing about those issues. Declarative pipelines. Yay. So, to sum up, pipelines can now be defined with a simpler syntax. There are, inside a step in your Jenkins file, there's a number of declarative section blocks, is what I'm calling them, for common configuration areas. For example, currently, your stages, tools that need to be installed, post-build actions and notifications, your environment, because we all end up needing to set environment variables sometimes, and the build agent or Docker image that you use for running your build. And there's more of these to come. And it's all wrapped up in a pipeline step, so it's a block of configuration with syntactic and semantic validation at runtime, and also available outside runtime. You can do linting against it without actually having to run the build to make sure that you actually didn't forget a curly brace, or you typed a parameter name or something like that. I need to make it really clear, this is not a separate thing from pipeline. This is pipeline. It's just a different way to define pipelines. In fact, it's actually even still Groovy, sort of. It's configured and run from a Jenkins file, just as you're used to with pipeline. The step syntax within the pipeline block is valid both in the declarative syntax and in full-power pipeline script. It's not like you have to use a different syntax for running shell here and there. It's the same thing. But this does make a number of things easier. We can have logic that determines how we're executing the build and make sure that, to address that, that problem I mentioned earlier, that even if your build fails, we'll still be able to run actions at the end of it without you having to remember to do a try catch. Just as when you set up a mail to get sent at the end of your freestyle job, even if your build fails, you're still getting an email. Agent provides simpler control over where your build runs by providing some abstraction layers above choosing the Docker image, or eventually building a Docker file and then running in that container. And you'll see more of these sections and the value that they provide as we go on further in the talk. So what does this look like? It looks like that. Exciting, huh? All right, thank you. All right, bye. So let me explain what goes in that pipeline block, or pipeline step. I've been calling them sections, for lack of a better term, because naming is hard. And in each case, it's the name of the section and then the value for that section. So think of it like a configuration or a JSON key value or whatever. And the sections we currently have implemented are stages, agent, environment, tools, post-build, and notifications. So let's walk through what each of those are. Stages is the meat of it. Stages is where you define your actual build and what's actually going to run. We take advantage of the recently released block scope stage step, where you can actually just put your whole stage in a block rather than remember where you put stage steps. So you can think of each stage block kind of like an individual build step in a freestyle job. You can do whatever you want. You can just have one stage that does 80 billion things, but then you're going to lose out on the advantages of logging, of visualization, etc. that you get from using your stages. There must be a stages section present, because we want to have that list of stages, because there's some ideas we have in the future that take advantage of not just having individual stages scattered throughout. So, an example that you can't see very well, and I apologize, it's an image, so I can't even expand it too much. Where we got stages, there we go. And then within it we have two specific stage sections specified. One named build that runs a shell script within a timeout, just as we can do in traditional pipeline script. Then when that completes, another stage will take off that runs a shell script that deploys something, which is nice of it, I think. Agent is, at its core, determines where your build runs. As I mentioned, one of the big differences between freestyle and pipeline is that you don't just say, here's the label I'm running on, and the whole build runs on one machine. But it also gives us the ability to hide some of the complexity behind doing things like running on a specific label and then running Docker on there, or things like that. These are the current possible settings. They actually will change slightly with a little bit of simplification when I get around to doing the release. But you can specify to a label of an empty label to say run anywhere. You can specify a Docker image, in which case it will run on any node, spin up a Docker container from that image, and run the build within that. You can specify both a Docker image and a label to say run on a node of that label type in that image, or you can specify agent none, in which case the declarative pipeline logic doesn't work, manage your node. Instead, you actually have to run an explicit node block like you do in standard pipeline script. We're planning to make this extensible and composable going forward. For example, the ability to specify a path to a Docker file, which would get built automatically, and then the build would be run within an image created from that Docker file. And these are the two sections that are required, agent and stages. That's all you actually need. You need to tell it where to run and what to run. Everything else is optional. So there's optional things. The tool section allows you to define tools to auto-install and add to the path in your build. I should note this doesn't work on Docker. There's still some things around that that may or may not ever happen. And it's ignored if agent none is specified, because how does it know where it's going to be installing the tool? It takes the standard Maven, Jenkins tool installations for Maven, JDKs, Gradle, whatever else you've configured, and allows you to specify, okay, install the Maven version I configured, install the Java version I configured, and make sure they're on my path. Nice and simple. Just not a huge deal, but it makes things a little easier. Environment. Environment variables are useful sometimes, right? And this way we can pass them in, we define them in a block, move on, they're set. Nice and easy. They'll be available throughout the entire build at every point along the way. I've mentioned notifications in post-build before. I'm a little bit obsessive about them. They're a direct analogy to the post-build actions in a freestyle job. They're going to be taken a look at the end of your build regardless. First post-build, which still runs on the node that your build ran on. So you can do things like JUnit results or archiving artifacts, things where you need to look in the workspace and actually find files. While notifications runs afterwards, that's where you can do emails, HipChat, etc. Each of those blocks contains one or more build condition keys and then steps to execute if that build condition is met. So, the build conditions are an extension point. It's basically a key that maps to a little script behind the scenes that checks to see whether it's true. So, success will anything that's in a success block will only run if the build is successful. Failure, oddly enough, only when it's failed. You can probably guess about unstable. Changed is an example of a little more complicated logic, and then it looks to see, okay, is this build status different than the previous build status, and will only fire when that's the case. And always will always run, no matter what the build status is. A couple examples of that. Again, I apologize, the font is too small. I always mess that up. So here in the notifications, we're saying, when the build has succeeded, let's send a message to HipChat saying the build passed. But if it failed, not only do we want to put a message in HipChat saying the build failed, we want to send an email to somebody so that they know that they broke the build and know to go fix it. They may not care if the build succeeded, just say whatever. So then, with this configured in your Jenkins file, then at the end of the build, it'll look at the status and it will respond accordingly. And here on the post-build side, when the build, no matter what, we're going to want to archive whatever artifacts we get. We're going to want to process whatever JUnit results we can get. But only when it fails do we care about cleaning up the failure. It could be something where we know that when it fails, it could leave some weird files in temp that we need to nuke or something like that. So here we can say only when the build fails do these things. Think of it like, well, try catch, I guess. Yep. Can we get the lights dimmed a little bit more so they can see the font better? Please? Is there anybody here who can do that? Okay, Brian's going to try.
Try is a good
Try catch.
Try catch.
All right. Meanwhile, I'll just shuffle around up here.
Question.
Yes, sir.
For these different things, what order are they processed in? Is always processed before or after failure?
I'm honestly not sure. I believe it's just processed in the order they're declared, but I'll check on that. That's a good question. I I should probably get a more deterministic approach and get that put in there. I'll get a Jira open and take a look at that.
Order their declaration would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you are declaring the agent section, if you have multiple Docker images,
The question is when you're declaring, specifying the agent section, if you got multiple Docker images, how do you do that? Well, are you talking about running different stages in different Docker images?
you're basically pipelining. So perhaps say you have a JDK with a main man with a Firefox browser, you can install it.
Well, then that's where the Docker file approach would come in, where you specify the Docker file that will build your image, and then you run on that image. That's not there yet, it will be. I'm gonna move forward, if that's okay. I've got time for questions at the end. I want to actually make sure I get through my slides. There's 42 of them. So some common use cases aren't covered by the sections we have right now. I'm not denying that. This is, I will admit, an MVP. We are very aware of this. There are more sections in the works. We'll cover the ones that we've already got on the roadmap later in the presentation, and it will end up being an extension point so that other plugins can contribute more configuration sections going forward. Because it's Jenkins, and therefore everything has to be extensible. It's not Jenkins. So here's a real-world example that's actually taken from the Jenkins file in the plugins repo. Is it more visible now?
Yes.
Hurrah! So here we're saying we need to have Maven and JDK installed because it's kind of hard to run a Maven build if you do not have Maven and a JDK. So this is ensuring that I'm getting those installed. On the master run I'm doing this, I don't really care which node it runs on. They're all good, so I'm saying label empty. And again, there's a better syntax for that in the next release, because that is a little awkward, isn't it? But I could have put in a specific label if there was, a subset of machines that was allowed to run on. And then I've got just one stage, just run Maven clean install, and Maven test failure ignore, so that the build doesn't fail at that point in case there's something else I wanted to do. Because I would rather the build be marked unstable if tests have failed rather than failed. And then here I've got my post-build and my notifications. Post-build, like I said, I'm always going to want to archive the artifacts that I built. I'm always going to want to check for JUnit results. So it doesn't matter to me what the post-build status is, I just want to make sure it always happens. The notification section is ugly. That's something else that I'm going to be working on going forward, because right now it's hard to be elegant about how you send notifications outside from pipeline script or the declarative pipeline. But we'll get there. But here I'm saying, if the build succeeds, send me an email and tell me it's succeeded, because I like knowing things. And if it failed, well, tell me that it failed. And if it's unstable, tell me it's unstable. Exciting, huh? But I'm not claiming it's like a complicated example, but it is a real world one. I have gotten those emails, all three of them. Not at the same time, that's not actually possible. That would be some kind of Schrodinger status, and I don't think we can do that. We're not quantum computers. Speaking of things you can't see, so you can do parallel execution within a stage. You can either have a group of steps or you can have parallel. Only one or the other. You can't mix and match. So if I put parallel here, I can say, okay, within this stage, let's run something on Windows, something on OS X, and something on Linux. It's the same syntax that parallel step has in pipeline script. We're hoping to get some syntactic sugar on that in general, but this does work. It will run all those stages, parallel blocks, at the same time on the appropriate node. We had to specify agent none here, or we did specify agent none here because we were managing the nodes. Sorry, yes? If you had that's the same way it would be. If you had a previous stage, how would the results propagate down to the other? You can use the same way you can do it in pipeline script. You can use the stash step to stash artifacts, and then with a name tag attached to it, then unstash with that name tag, and hey, look, the artifacts are back. Or you could, check out the code and rebuild it if you wanted too. There's various options. But you can also still use the agent pointing to a specific label or Docker image, and then later on use node for something more specific. It's just that you're still going to be running on the first node while that's happening. So yeah, Docker and environment. This is not a real world example, though kittens are furry and bananas are great. But yeah. So here we're running it in an Ubuntu container. What do you do? It's just works. You don't have to think about it much. I'm setting those two environment variables that kittens are furry and bananas are great. I could have done it the way around, but bananas aren't actually furry, I hope. And then in the stage, I'm running a shell script, and within the shell script, we've got the environment variable kittens. And within the echo step, we can get at the environment variable while we're still in the pipeline script with env.bananas. So again, simplistic, but it works. And I like things that work. One of the things I really am proud of with this is validation. How many here have had pipeline jobs fail with mysterious stack traces of doom? Oh, come on, it's more of you. We all have. You get this giant message, and if you made 3 typos in your, in step names or parameter names, first time it runs, you get the first error. Second time it runs, you get the second error. Third time it runs, you get the third. You have to iterate over and over again. It's annoying. So, come on. There we go. There's my octopus. I always want this guy in my slide decks. He's my friend. So that's a very legitimate common complaint. You have to iterate. You have these really confusing stack traces when your build just failed and you don't really know what happened. And you have to figure out where the stack traces the stuff that's pertinent. You don't have to do that. And there's no way to verify that your Jenkins file is valid and won't throw strange compilation errors or typos, etc., without actually running the build. So, no, we'll do that. So, we're making it better. We have an entirely new validation system here. We validate the semantics of the configuration, the syntax, argument types to steps, and more. It's run right at the very beginning of build execution every single time, so that before it actually starts trying to do stuff in your build, it'll detect if there are errors in your syntax, if you're missing an required argument for a step, if you are passing the wrong type to a step, and it will give you all those errors like they were compilation errors, so it'll point to the specific place that failed. There is still a stack trace. I haven't been able to kill that yet, but you can just ignore it. There's something useful right above the stack trace. So what the validation is doing, to simplify it a bit, it's making sure that all the required, sorry?
Is there a way to run that outside of the job?
Wait, just wait. Trying to jump ahead of me. First, we make sure that all required sections and all required fields in those configuration sections are present, so that we don't have an empty environment that goes, wait, why did you do that? We check for required step parameters, because it sucks when you forget a required step parameter. We make sure that your parameter types are correct, because there's a number of times where it doesn't really want a string, but you thought it did. And we error out if a tool or tool version that you've tried to configure there isn't actually available in your Jenkins master. And there's some other little things, and there'll be more as we go, as we find more interesting things we can catch early on. So, for example, here, if I just do pipeline agent none, it's going to error saying, yeah, I'm missing the stages section. It doesn't have what I need. Well, here the error is pointing at the pipeline block because, well, there's missing. You can't actually point at a stages block that's missing. Another example here is that there's duplicate environment variable names. That's obviously kind of gibberish. And while you could technically think that, yeah, you could just reassign a variable name, but if you have duplicate environment variable names, that's probably a mistake. You probably didn't mean to do that, so we'll check and not allow you to have duplicates. And here is a slightly uglier error. It gets prettier someday, I promise. But it's telling you that despite my attempt to install Gradle and run Gradle, I haven't configured Gradle on this Jenkins master, and it instead tells me what is available, which, like I said, there's some ugly there. It's going to get better, I promise. Oh, I should have really changed that subject. Anyway, this one is showing 2 errors involving parameters. One is that the time parameter should be an int. It's not a string. That's wrong. So it's saying, hey, look, right there, sometime. You're wrong. That's not a thing. And here it's saying that banana is not actually a valid parameter for timeout, which makes sense. And it suggests that maybe I meant unit instead. It's nice when it tells me that not only that I was wrong, it gives me an idea of how to fix it. And yes, there's a linter coming soon. There's an API endpoint on the Jenkins master already present for validating your Jenkins files that are using the declarative pipeline. I'll be adding a command line tool probably in the next release. I just haven't had the time to actually glue all the pieces together. That you point it to your Jenkins master, you point it to your Jenkins file, it reads in your Jenkins file, types it to the Jenkins master, gets the results back with JSON that tells you either if this passed, if this failed, if it failed, what are the errors, and prints it out for you. Yay. Maybe to have this in the next release. Sorry?
You think that'll work on the older style
No,
pipeline?
it won't work on the older style. That's part of why we did it this way. You can do some things there in terms of trying to get pre-validation on the pipeline script, but Groovy is such a wonderfully meta-programming language that you can't really know for sure what's wrong until you run it and it doesn't work. There's some errors we could catch ahead of time, basic compilation errors and the like, and should open in Jira and we can probably add a front end for doing that. But there's a lot of stuff that we just can't tell until we actually try to execute it. Like, what step is this? You could have redefined the step somewhere else in the script, and it's a pain. This wasn't actually that hard to do, so I like easy. But we can take a look at that. So, this is great so far, and you're all going to use this in production. I'm going to wonder why you're using it in production. It's not ready yet. It's ready for use, but it's pretty limited. So obviously there has to be a future. So, what's coming in the future, you ask, or I pretend you ask. So, some of the most noteworthy things that you can't do right now, you can't do things like wrap the entire build in a timeout, all the stages. You can't define build parameters for using a multi-branch pipeline, where your build parameters have to be defined in your Jenkins file. So, among the things we've got lined up are wrappers around the entire build. It's not exactly build wrappers, but stuff like the timeout block that run around your entire build and make sure things happen. Build parameters, defining those for subsequent build. Build triggers, again, for when you're running from a multi-branch pipeline or a GitHub organization job. So you can say run every 10 minutes or don't run ever or whatever. And other miscellaneous job properties. And another section for shared library loading. I don't know how many of you saw Jesse's talk earlier today where he talked about the new shared library functionality and the at library annotation to load stuff. That doesn't quite fit in this syntax. You can put it in there, but it's a little weird. So we're going to have a section where you can just say library and then specify the URLs or file names of the things you want to load, and it'll do it for you behind the scenes. None of this is here yet, because I had to get the talk written. No, I'm blaming me. I'm terrible at writing talks. But this is all coming. There's issues for all this. I've got some prototypes and ideas for these, and we'll keep moving forward. So again, like I mentioned, Jenkins is addicted to extensibility, and we're no different here. We're going to add more extensibility. Build conditions are already extensible, so that someone could write a plugin that contributed one to say, okay, I only want to send what I want to trigger if every third build has failed, and it's a Tuesday. You could do something like that. I don't know why you want to do that one, but the possibility is what's interesting here. And I couldn't think of a better example. Sections are still going to be extensible, like I mentioned, so that a plugin that provides its own aspect of this configuration that I haven't thought of yet can contribute that itself. Once you have that plugin installed, it'll become a valid section. The linting and error checking, etc., will all work with that new section. And another is agent backends. Like I mentioned, that we're going to add the ability to point to a Docker file, build that Docker file, and run it, and run your build within it. That is just going to be the beginning. That's going to be an extension point that other people can contribute additional chunks of logic to decide how the environment in which your build runs, the context in which your build runs, is determined. I'm not sure what people will do with that, but I have a feeling that there'll be some interesting things. Like you could say, make sure that I'm running on a machine that's based from this AMI, or that maybe generate a new AMI with Packer if you, for some reason, hate Docker and want to do things in a slightly older way. But yeah, so we'll be adding more backends as we find more useful configurations for you, and any other plugin developer will be able to add more as well. One of my favorite things I've got on the roadmap that was not originally in this slide deck, but somebody asked for it earlier this week, and I'd already had it plotted, and so I was happy and got to add it in, is a stage dependency graph. Adding some markers in that stages section to say, okay, stage B depends on stage A, or stage D can only run after both stage C and D are done. So that it could then take those dependencies, build out a dependency graph, and figure out the right order and parallelization to execute your build without you having to actually specify it yourself. And you'll also be able to do things like limit how many parallel branches you'll run at once, etc. And you can do things like have two stages that run serially in one chunk, and then one that takes a longer time, and then you wait till they all come back together. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with that. Eclipse and IntelliJ integration, maybe, perhaps. So since we've got a schema, as it were, for the declarative syntax, we're exposing that via our REST API. We've got the validation via the REST API as well. It should be possible to write a plugin for an IDE that not only gives you autocomplete and type validation and the like, but actually can, on the fly, make sure that what you're writing is valid. And again, the specific Jenkins master that you're going to run it on. Because one of the problems of doing, autocomplete and validation, when each Jenkins master has a different set of plugins on it and a different set of configuration that applies, is how do you know what's actually valid there? Well, it's theoretically possible, theoretically, to do that. I make no promises that this one will happen because I have no idea how to do that, how to write those plugins. But I think it would be fun to have them. And if I can find some sucker to write them for me, all the better. So now you probably could guess what the one thing that's still missing is, since it's kind of shown up a few times throughout the week. Visual editor, yay! So it doesn't work yet. If you saw my demo, you saw that I tried clicking save repeatedly and absolutely nothing happens. Sometimes discard changes does things, but not always. It's very early on. It's part of Blue Ocean. It takes advantage of the fact that declarative pipelines are structured, that there's a model that we can understand and represent, that it can't just go into arbitrary loops and nested craziness. It reads the Jenkins file from source control, or will read the Jenkins file from source control, and then save the pipeline that you generate in the editor back into your source control. So you're still doing the pipeline as code, you're still getting the branching and the versioning alongside the rest of your source, but you can use an editor. It's very, very early work right now, but it should ramp up in the next couple months. And we have been designing the declarative pipelines with the intention of working with the editor from the beginning. So it's not like we're going to suddenly come to a point in probably long ago, oh wait, there's a dramatic incompatibility between how they think about things. This is designed to work in an editor, period, end of sentence. So, a couple small screenshots of the editor. I imagine I'm sure a chunk of you saw the demo or saw James DeMay's talk, but look, you can like create a stage by clicking a thing and try to save it. And then when you're in a stage, you just add steps. Right now, all it's got is run script, but any other step that could work in pipeline will show up as an option with configuration. And while you're limited in some of the things that you can write inside the stages block to make sure that we can fit with the declarative model and make sure that we can actually represent it in the editor, there's also a way to escape that and write arbitrary, whatever crazy pipeline code you want. You could write if, within an if, within a loop, thing. That goes to the moon. Well, it would only go to the moon if you approve that in script security. But for now, we just have run script. We don't even have anything but stages. But you can add stages, so it, behind the scenes translates that to a parallel block. And then when we run this build in and look at its results from pipeline, we can see the same visualization. So if you want to try declarative pipelines, and I again emphasize try, because I will fix bugs, but it doesn't do that much yet. Install Blue Ocean, you get it. It's bundled in Blue Ocean. It's in the beta. And thank you all very much. I appreciate you all coming. And now, questions. You. So right now, the question is, this looks good, but should you use it now? No, you shouldn't use it. Because I want to know what I need to do better. I want to know what I need to do to make y'all happy. You'll be able to, in most cases, copy and paste code from your pipeline scripts directly into the stages sections, and it'll just work. And when it doesn't, when it violates our declarative subset, you'll get messages that say, no, you need.
Two questions. It looks great.
Thank you.
One thing I always kind of love to see a lot of other languages was pound include. So I can grab sections and not have to type them over and over again.
Shared libraries. He likes pound include in C. The shared libraries that Jesse talked about is exactly that, yeah.
I didn't think that was a library.
The shared libraries is a set of functions, yeah.
I think of libraries as binaries.
Yeah.
The next question that I had was, in those shared libraries, I can name components and then I can refer to them. So I don't have to retype it section by section.
The question was whether you could have configuration in shared libraries and just reload it from that. Currently, no, but that's an interesting thing. Please open a JIRA. Not you, I was skipping past you to you. You've been raising your hand repeatedly. So.
How are you going to be releasing the CLI, the command line utility?
The question was, how am I going to be releasing the CLI linter? I'm not sure yet. Honestly, if you have suggestions, I'd love to hear them. That's part of why it hasn't been released yet, is I can't figure out how to distribute it right. I may just post it to a blog post. I'll figure out something. I have to think about that one more.
Okay.
I haven't actually putting this side, yes.
What's the best way to keep up with the development of this code?
What's the best way to keep up with the development of this code? That's an interesting question. I'm bad at that. What?
What's your address?
My address is not your business. Number 7, tough, 94715. Not my zip code, people. But we've got JIRAs on issues.jenkins-ci.org. But yeah, I'll talk to the Blue Ocean guys and see how they've been doing this and see if I can,
Make a blog.
Well, I have one blog post, but yes, I could make a blog. But I'll see what they suggest, because they actually, try that, and I don't really know it. I'm gonna keep looking over here so y'all can wait. Does anybody over here have a question? Yes.
Only available in Blue Ocean?
It can work outside Blue Ocean. It's bundled with Blue Ocean currently, and it does, like Blue Ocean, require Jenkins 2.7.1 or later, because there's some magic groovy stuff I need. But you can use it outside of Blue Ocean. It just happens to be it is very synergistic with Blue Ocean, actually, right? Word, not just buzzword. So it made sense to bundle them together. Yeah, pipeline model definition is the plugin name. It's a terrible name, but once this hits 1.0, you're never going to have to know the name. It's just when you install pipeline, it'll come along automatically. But until it's actually done-ish, it kind of is silly to install on all your machines when you don't need it. All right, now I'll come back over here. Yeah,
Two questions. Yeah, two questions. Notification section.
Sorry?
The notification section.
Yes, notification
does it work
section.
only at the end of the build?
Currently, only.
With each of the stages?
So currently, it does only work at the end of the build, but there's an open JIRA for adding per stage notifications. That's just a feature that I haven't had the chance to do yet, but it's definitely intended. The default behavior will always be end of build, but yeah, you've got to be able to do, there's definitely useful use cases for doing it at arbitrary points at the end of your stages. Now your turn.
Support for PowerShell as a direct step. Who would even use that?
So the question was support for PowerShell as a step rather than having to run back PowerShell something. Orthogonal to this, but a good question. And I am not the person to talk to about it. I'm sorry. I think there's a JIRA. I'll see if there's anything I can find about pushing it forward, because I know that's something people have wanted. You already asked 2 questions.
No, that's one.
Oh,
I have the second question.
but tough. It's still not your turn. Your turn.
The agent step,
Yeah. Section. Section.
if you have input approval stuff,
Yeah.
does that always have to be done?
So the question was about how the input step interacts with what node you're running on, with the agent and all that. So we thought about this one. Should we try dropping out of the agent when we do an input step? Because an input step will just sit there until somebody actually interacts with it, and it could, if you run that while you're in a node block, it'll eat that executor until you're done. Currently, it will eat the executor until you're done if you're using an agent label, agent Docker. If you're using agent none, obviously you're controlling what node you're on more granularly. I want to see how painful that is, how much of an inconvenience that is, to see whether it's worth the effort of finding a workaround. Because there are some issues. We want to make sure we get back the same workspace on the same agent, that we don't have to wait forever to get on it if there's other stuff running. That's an area that I think needs user feedback and user experience for us to find the right answer. I don't think I know what the right answer is there, but whatever we end up coming to a conclusion is the right answer, we will implement it. Back over here. Yes, there will be credentials section. That is waiting on some ideas that need to be more fleshed out for secrets management in this context. But yes, there will be the ability to specify credentials or secrets, probably secrets more generally with credentials as part of that. And have those used either throughout the build or probably throughout the build they'd be available rather than per stage. There are some limitations that we're taking on with this approach, where like the node block being wider scope than it might ideally be, or like not being able to narrowly aim credentials or environment variables per stage, because we want to make sure that this actually solves 80% of the problems easily rather than 100% of the problems with extreme pain. For when it gets to the point where your use case is edgy enough that this doesn't work, that's where pipeline script is the answer. It's not a replacement for every conceivable use of pipeline script by a long shot. The two are a combination to figure out what the right answer is. Okay, I should stop because it's 4:30. And that means I'm done. Thank you all very much for coming.